Hi, and welcome to Professor Pincushion. I'm Tova. Today I'm going to show you how to recycle your favorite t-shirts in order to create a unique quilt. This demonstration is for the quilt top section only, and you'll want to use t-shirts that are still in relatively good shape. Because t-shirts are stretchy, I'll show you how to stabilize them with interfacing so that you can border these with a contrasting cotton fabric. If you're like me and have trouble parting with your beloved garments, this is a perfect way to recycle. Let's go ahead and get started. Here are some of the supplies I'm going to be using for this project. I have my sewing machine, all-purpose thread, some straight pins, an iron, rotary cutter mat, my rotary cutter ruler, and then I am also using a quilter square ruler. Now my quilter square is 20 inches by 20 inches. You don't quite need anything that big. If you're doing like I am, which is a 10.5 by 10.5 inch square for each block, then you just need something that should be a little bit bigger than that in order to do this, or the exact size if you can find it. You're going to need some t-shirts. The amount is going to be dependent on how big you want your quilt to be. I'm doing mine that's going to be a throw or lap size. So I need 20 blocks, which means I need 20 different t-shirts if I want each block to be a different t-shirt. You need some interfacing that we're going to be applying to the back of each t-shirt. For a 10 by 10 inch block like my size, you need 1/3 of a yard for each block that you do. So if I'm doing 20 blocks, I would just multiply 20 by 1/3 and that would tell me how much I need. Obviously, if you're doing more t-shirts than that, you would just multiply that by 1/3. Then I need some cotton fabric that I'm going to be putting as my stripping between each block. This depends on how big you want to make it. For the size that I'm doing, you're going to need between 1 and 1 1/4 yards of this cotton fabric. First, you're going to start cutting apart each t-shirt. So first what I would do is cut off each sleeve. Cut your t-shirt apart at the remaining seams. So I'm cutting it at the shoulder seams and then the 2 side seams, essentially separating the front from the back. Press all your t-shirt pieces that you're going to be cutting a block from. For each block that you're going to have, you're going to cut a piece of interfacing that's going to go on the back of that block. So in my example, I'm doing an unfinished block that's 10.5 by 10.5 inches. I'm going to make this bigger than that by a couple inches. So this is about 12 inches by 12 inches. When attaching your fusible interfacing, you're going to want to have your t-shirt wrong side facing up. And you want to look at the design on the right side so you can make sure that you know where it is in relation to your shirt. If you need to use a fabric marker to kind of mark it on the back so you at least have a general idea where it is, then that's even better. Because this interfacing is not going to cover the whole t-shirt, you just kind of want to center it over wherever your design is. So if my design is right here, I'm going to center this best I can. And I have the glue bubble of my lightweight interfacing going towards the back of my t-shirt. I'm going to place my press cloth over that. And I have my iron heating up. And then I'm just going to dampen my cloth and use my iron to press it. Now you really want to make sure that you're not wrinkling your t-shirt as you're applying the lightweight fusible interfacing. So when you place it, you're going to be very careful. I'm just going to set it down for a few seconds. And then I'm going to carefully lift it up and move it over to another section until you have the whole piece of your fusible interfacing attached to the back of the t-shirt. So just make sure that you're not just sliding your iron across, you're actually picking it up and then placing it down. Next, you're going to grab your quilter square ruler, and if you're doing something like I am where you're using a square that's bigger than what you're cutting out your blocks as, then go ahead and also grab some masking tape. And you can see like I did, which is I put masking tape to kind of block out and create a square the size that I'm going to actually be using. So in my example, I'm doing 10.5 by 10.5. I go down 10.5 and I put some masking tape straight across and then do the same thing this way. So that way I'm looking at a block here that's 10.5 by 10.5. Now I'm just doing 10.5 because I'm using smaller t-shirts so my designs are smaller. If you're doing t-shirts with a bigger design on it or using larger t-shirts, you can make this any size you want to. You can even do 15 by 15. Next, I'm going to cut out a block out of each t-shirt, and I'm using my little ruler here as a guideline. So I have the tape so I can visualize what my block is going to look at, but also remember there's going to be a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so it'll get a little bit smaller on each side. So this way I can just lay my ruler how I want it to be, and your design doesn't necessarily have to be centered. You can do off center, you can really do it any way you want, but this just gives you an idea on what it's basically going to look like once it's cut out. So once I have it the way I want it, I'm going to grab my rotary cutter, and don't forget to do this on your rotary mat. And I'm going to cut this side, and then I'm going to cut this top side. Without moving your t-shirt, you're going to rotate your ruler. So you can see my tape's on the other side, and I'm going to line up the edge of the tape with my new cut edges here and here. So I'm going to line this all up, and that way we can get a nice precise square. You're going to grab your cutter again, and now I'm going to cut on the 2 remaining sides, and that's going to give you your block. On a large surface, you want to lay out your blocks in the design that you want to have for your quilt. So I'm placing them together and seeing which blocks look best with which blocks. Now you also need to know what size quilt you're making at this point. So in my example, I'm going to be doing the throw size, and that means I need 5 rows of blocks, and each row is going to have 4 blocks a piece. So that's how I get 20 blocks. This is 4 times 5. I'll be putting in the description other size quilts and how many blocks need to be in each row for your assistance. Next, I'm going to be cutting strips for my cotton fabric. This fabric is 45 inches in width. I have it folded in half and then folded in half again just to make it easier, and I'm going to cut this out using my rotary cutter and having it on a mat. The width of the strip is 2.5 inches, and for the size quilt I'm going to make, I'm going to start with cutting 7 strips. Again, that's 2.5 inches in width. At this point, you should have a bunch of strips like this, 2.5 inches in width by the full width of the fabric. So this is 45 inches in length here. And I'm going to start attaching it to my first block in my first row. So this is the block that's going to be in the top left corner. I have it right side facing up. I'm going to grab my strip. And if you have an obvious right side to your strip, that is going to go right side to right side. And I'm going to place it here in the left corner. Now I'm not going to line up this top edge. Instead, this is going to go up about 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch past it. So if I was to flip this over, you can see my blue fabric is just peeking out just a little bit, but I am going to line up this edge. So you can go ahead and use your straight pins to pin it into place, and we're going to sew from the top of our block to the bottom of the block on this edge, and you can go ahead and just leave this hanging for now. For this, I'm sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and end of your seam. Use your rotary cutter and mat to cut off the excess fabric that's sticking out on each side. So I'm going to line this up with the edge of my block. I'm going to cut this off, and then I'm going to do the same thing down here and cut this off. Once it's trimmed, you're going to pull the strip out from the block, and you're going to press your seam open. Take the strip that you cut off, so this was the one that was hanging down here and I trimmed it, same strip. And now I'm going to go on this side, again, right side to right side, and you can have it stick out a little bit up here again. And then you're going to pin and sew another 1/4 inch seam allowance. With this strip on, I can now attach the next block in my row. So it's going to be this fabric. I'm going to place them together, right side to right side. And I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch seam allowance and then press it open, just like I did with these other ones. Once this is attached, I can go ahead and still grab my strip piece that's left over, and I can attach it to this side. So I'm just repeating the process, and then I would sew on my next block. From one 45 inch strip, you should be able to do this 4 times. I've completed one row. So the row starts with a strip, and then there's a strip in between each block. So my row has 4 blocks. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I have a strip at the end. So you can see there's a strip in between each one to complete one row. So once this row is complete, I can go ahead and do the same process for the next row. Once you have all your rows completed, we're going to start sewing them together, and there's going to be strips in between each row. So in order to figure out how many strips we need to cut out for this section, you're going to take whatever number of rows you have and you're going to add 1 to it. For example, I have 5 rows for my quilt. I'm going to add 1 to it, so that makes it 6. Now you're going to remember this number. Measure the length of your row. If your row, I would say, is 85 inches or less in length, you're going to take that number, remember mine was 6, and you're going to double it. So that means I need to cut out 12 strips. And the strips are the same length as they were before. So it's still the 45 inches, and then the width is 2.5 inches. So it's just like cutting these. You're just going to cut out 12 of them. And the reason why we're cutting out more of them is because, for instance, my length of a row is 51 inches. This is only 45 inches in length. So I need to sew 2 of them together in order to get enough length to go across the whole row. Now if it's more than 85 inches, you're still going to do the same thing. So the number of rows plus 1, so for me that's 6, and triple it. And this is because you might have to sew 3 of these strips together in order to cover the full length. If you need to sew your strips together, you're going to place 1 strip horizontally like I have here, right side up. You're going to take your other strip and it's going to go right side to right side, and I'm going to place them together so they're going perpendicular with each other. And you can see I'm letting this extend past about a quarter of an inch, and then you're going to sew diagonally from this corner to this corner here. And if you need to use a fabric marker just to mark it so it's easier for when you're sewing it. You can see that I drew a line, so it's a lot easier for me to sew in a straight line, but it's just going diagonally. I'm using a regular length straight stitch, and don't forget to do your back stitching. Once you have your seam, you can go ahead and trim most of this off. So I'm cutting off, so I'm leaving about 3/8 of an inch left past the stitches. And then you can go ahead and press that seam open. So I could take this, open it up and press it, and you see you get a diagonal seam like this. Now I have one that's I've already pressed, and you'll notice that some of the seam allowance kind of peeks out, so you can also go ahead and just trim that off, and what you should end up with is something that looks like this. Now that we have strips that are long enough, we can start attaching them to our rows and attaching all the rows together. So I'm going to take 1 strip that's going to go above my first row. So this is my first row. I'm going to find the center, and I'm just going to kind of eyeball this seam so it's in the center. You don't really have to do it that way, but whatever you do, make it consistent so when you do each strip between rows, you're pretty much doing the same thing. So once I have it lined up, I have right side up, I'm just going to flip this so it's right side together, line up this raw edge from one length of the row to the other length. Now my strip is actually going to extend past this, but that's fine. You're going to sew your 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then you can go ahead and trim off any stripping that you have going past your row. After my top strip is sewn on, I'm then going to sew one on the bottom of row 1 as well, so then we can attach row 2. I drew lines going straight down from this seam and this seam, and I'm going to do it for all my other seams too. That way I have something to line up when I'm doing row 2, so I can make sure that my blocks are more or less lining up. So in order to match this, I'm going to pin these areas first, and then I can go ahead and fill in the areas in between, because we want to make sure once we sew it, everything's going to line up and it's not going to look sloppy. Once I pretty much have it lined up, I can go ahead, flip this over so it's right side to right side, and I have my lines here that I can then line up with my seams. So I'm going to do those areas first. I'm also going to pin the ends first, and any seams that I have, and again just do everything in between, and then you can go ahead and do that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you have it pressed, you can then go ahead, add another strip below that, repeat the process and add the next row, and so on until you have all your rows stitched together. After you put on your last row, don't forget to finish it off with another strip, because we want to make sure that each block is completely outlined by your strip fabric. So all you have to do to finish this off is just like you did before, lay your strip right side up. This is right side up. And then you're going to place them right side together and do your 1/4 inch seam allowance and then press it open. With all rows and strips attached, your T-shirt quilt top is finished. If you need help in completing the rest of your quilt, check out our tutorial, How to Sew a Block Quilt. We'll put a direct link so you can jump straight to creating your quilt sandwich and adding binding. If you make one of these, please share a picture with us. New tutorials are released weekly, so please subscribe to be notified of the next release. Make sure to check out our other videos and visit ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 200 sewing video tutorials, including our exclusive premium content. Our premium membership is only $5 a month for unlimited access and only available at ProfessorPincushion.com. Also, don't forget to download our mobile app for videos on the go. Thanks for watching.